Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're grappling with some really big, urgent questions about humanity's future, where we're headed. We're diving into the work of Samraj, specifically his ideas around prior unity and something he calls reality politics for ordinary men and women. Our aim here is to unpack a pretty radical critique of, global civilization as we know it, and then explore a very unconventional path he proposes for, basically, survival and real peace. So what are the core arguments? And how might they really challenge our day-to-day assumptions about politics, about society?
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. What really stands out in the source material, especially prior unity, the reality politics of peace, is this core assertion. It says, humanity's current crisis, all the big problems we see, they don't just stem from, external things. They come from something much deeper, something fundamental we've maybe forgotten or you've denied. This idea of prior unity. And we're going to explore how that idea shapes this vision he has, which is less about top-down policy, governments fixing everything, and more about a bottom-up, community-driven approach, what he calls reality politics.
Okay, prior unity. That's a compelling place to start. But first, the sources paint a pretty stark picture of where we are now. Words like critical juncture, even a late time of anti-civilization. When Adidai looks at the world, what are the key problems he's pointing to?
Well, the list is, as the text says, long and somber. And honestly, it covers a lot of what we hear about every day. You've got the big environmental issues, pollution, global warming, climate change, resource scarcity, like fuel. But it goes deeper into systemic things, too, like the abuse of power by corporations and governments, and all the social problems, disease, famine, poverty, overpopulation, crime. It's quite a list.
It really is.
And then there's the global picture, right? The international stuff. The sources are pretty blunt there, too. They talk about the huge buildup, the pervasive accumulation of really destructive weapons, and how nation states often seem to, avoid real cooperation. They tend to fall back on conflict, even war, to get what they want. It's a pretty comprehensive and worrying diagnosis.
It's definitely a daunting picture, but what's really striking is that Adidai doesn't just list the symptoms, he drills down to what he sees as the single root cause. And he says it's not our basic human nature. So if it's not that, what does he actually pinpoint?
Yeah, this is where it gets really specific. The text points the finger directly at the egoic, short-sighted rationality of modern man that guides his steps. It's like, imagine our whole way of thinking, our modern logic, is actually the problem. He argues this rationality is pushed down, repressed the recognition of his prior unity, and then, feeling pretty confident in itself, this rationality just flat out denied its very existence. So for Adidai, it's this fundamental denial of our connection, driven by a self-centered, egoic way of thinking that's really fueling the whole global crisis.
Wow, okay. Egoic, short-sighted rationality, that's quite a charge. And it brings us back to this prior unity you mentioned. What is that exactly, this inherent oneness? Can you give us a feel for it beyond just, saying it's a fact?
Absolutely. Think of it like this. Adidai is suggesting there's a fundamental level of reality where everything is already connected. It exists before all the differences we see, before we divide things up into me and you, us and them. It's like an underlying fabric. The sources call it the unity that is prior to all other facts and considerations. It is there. And it's interesting, Irvin Laszlo, in his introduction to the book, points out this isn't just some mystical idea. He sees echoes in science, in anthropology too.
That's fascinating. Does the source material give concrete examples of this prior unity, things we can kind of grasp?
It does, yeah. And they're pretty diverse. For instance, it mentions how particles in physics can be entangled, non-locally connected across space. That sounds a bit like quantum physics, right? Then it talks about living things, how they're all non-locally connected throughout the biosphere, like a planetary web. And it even points to what it calls so-called primitive people, suggesting they often lived with a deep sense of this connection, describing them as non-locally telepathically connected with one another, with their homeland and with their environment. Like they tapped into this unity naturally.
So it's this fundamental reality we've lost touch with. What happens then, according to Adidai, when we deny it? When we live as if we're all just separate units?
Well, the consequence is huge. It's not just about disagreeing more. The sources put it starkly. The opposite of not two is not peace. He's saying that denying this unity, this not two reality, directly creates conflict. It's the source of it. It leads us to fragment, to break down into these opposing camps, my country, my company, my people versus others. And that, he argues, is what fuels exploiting nature, exploiting each other, leading to things like widespread poverty. It's a direct line from denial to disaster.
Okay, so if prior unity is the real foundation, then our usual way of doing politics, our whole society, it's built on shaky ground, according to this view. How exactly does Adi-Da critique this current state of affairs? He uses strong terms like dark epoch, even anti-civilization.
Yeah, his critique is deep. He basically argues that we, as human beings, have collectively renounced our true political nature, our real power and responsibility. We've handed it over, subordinated ourselves to leaders and systems that are themselves trapped in that egoic mindset he talks about. The text lists them: power-seeking bureaucrats, benighted intellectuals, materialistic scientists, religious fundamentalists, and disturbed political revolutionaries, all seen as ego-bound. The idea is we've stopped taking real responsibility and just deferred to others who are part of the problem.
Right, so what does that look like for the average person? Someone just trying to make sense of the world, maybe watching the news.
Well, the text paints a pretty bleak picture there too. It describes humanity as a global mass of mere individuals, living like slaves of their own minds and egoically separate selves. We're called narcissistically enslaved by our own egoic motives. And it critiques how politics becomes just, listening to the news every night, reacting passively. We treat the state like some big, distant, parent-like thing that controls us. And this whole setup, he argues, fosters childish dependencies, makes us look for easy, illusory solutions instead of taking genuine personal responsibility. We become spectators. You know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
You tune into the news, maybe scroll through your phone, and it all just feels huge, overwhelming even.
Yeah, like you're watching this massive game play out.
Exactly, and you're sort of stuck on the sidelines, not even sure if you understand the rules, let alone if your voice matters. Quite an assessment. It definitely challenges how most of us probably see our role. It also brings up something even more fundamental you touched on, this idea of survival. Adi-Da calls the belief that survival is the ultimate law of life a fundamental illusion. Can you unpack that? That sounds counterintuitive. It really does, doesn't it? This is one of the most provocative parts of the critique. He's questioning the absolute bedrock assumption for many, that life is all about survival, that survival is the point, the goal. He calls this a fundamental illusion. Think about that, like the core programming driving us is faulty. He argues that this relentless focus on individual survival leads directly to aggressive ego glorification, making our separate self the absolute center, which then fuels competition, separation, conflict. Basically, he says, it makes human existence the overwhelming chaos of troubles it often seems to be. It's the engine of our problems, not the solution.
Okay, so if conventional politics is failing because it ignores prior unity, and even our focus on survival is misguided, what's the alternative? This reality politics for ordinary men and women that Adi-Da proposes, how does it actually shift things?
The shift is fundamental. It moves away from just reacting against things we don't like. The sources are really clear. Reaction is obviously not the way to rightly transform real politics. Instead, it's about proactively creating something new through cooperation. The call is for each person, for you, the listener, to become involved in intimate cooperative community, creating a real cooperative social culture. It's not about fixing the system from afar, it's about rebuilding the very fabric of human connection, creating a truly human culture and of a truly intimate daily human society.
So the change doesn't start out there with reforming institutions first, it starts much closer to home.
Exactly. That's the key point. The text explicitly says the true change that you must create is not principally in the system itself, but in the ordinary daily associations between yourself and other human beings. It requires individuals choosing to live differently in a non-egoic and non-competitive manner, in intimate cooperation, end quote. And that, he acknowledges, isn't easy. It requires what he calls ego-transcending discipline, consciously working to move beyond our own self-centeredness for the sake of the group, the community, change the relationships first.
Okay, ego-transcending discipline. And how does this translate practically? Like, how would communities handle basic needs, food, water, shelter?
Well, this is where the focus on local action really comes in. It's quite radical. The sources argue that the fundamentals of life must be pre-solved at the local level, right there, at the regional level where the daily cooperative community exists. So things like food security, resource management, these should be managed locally in one's own community and in natural cooperation with other communities. It envisions empowered local communities taking direct responsibility for their own well-being, working together, not just relying on distant authorities.
And salvation, or the solution, comes from rediscovering our unity. The unity that's prior to all our differences, all our separate ideas. It's the ground of being, essentially.
So if this prior unity is fundamental, how does, well, getting back in touch with it translate into freedom?
Yeah.
Especially the political freedom the sources talk about.
It's presented as a direct link. The sources are very clear on this. They say, only if the individual is grown to relinquish the ego principle and to embrace the prior unity principle can the individual become politically free.
So letting go of ego is political freedom.
In this view, yes. Indeed, to be thus grown is itself to be inherently politically free. It argues that all our usual efforts, science, tech, wanting quick fixes, they're often just extensions of the old problem-solving game, still rooted in that separate self.
Still ego-based.
Right. True liberation, they say, comes from directly participating in an ego-transcending manner in the indivisible and non-dual source condition.
Okay, that's deep.
Yeah.
Participating in the source condition.
It essentially means living from that place of unity, not from the isolated ego. And that shift is the foundation for real politics. They state, there is no right or truly human politics without conscious responsibility.
Then that means?
It means consciously stepping back from that childish ego dependence on the abstract state, and also the adolescent reaction to the daily news. It's about growing up, spiritually and politically, you could say.
These are powerful ideas, definitely philosophical.
And what happens to the state in this picture? Does government, as we know it, just vanish?
It's more of a transformation, really. The sources suggest a shift in the whole dynamic. The idea is, if the people become truly intelligent and freely cooperative, then the state will inevitably do or become likewise. So as people take back their power and responsibility through cooperation, those controlling parent-like aspects of bureaucracy just sort of wither away. They become obsolete through non-use. It's not about overthrowing, but outgrowing the need for that kind of top-down control by changing how citizens relate to each other and the world.
A very different vision of the state's role. And going back to that critique of survival, if survival isn't the true law of life, what does Adi Das say is? What should guide us instead?
Right, he offers a completely different principle. He says, the true law of life is one of right self-surrender. Now that sounds perhaps passive, but it means something active. The consistent transcending of all contraction upon separate and separative self, or ego. It's about letting go of that tight grip on our isolated self-identity, and also the transcending of loveless separation from what is egoically presumed to be not self. So it's actively choosing connection over separation, cooperation over conflict. This ego-transcending discipline, he argues, isn't just a nice spiritual idea. It's the only practical way to achieve real political freedom and peace.
Okay, so the foundation is this intimate, local cooperation driven by self-surrender. But the problems we face are global. How does this scale up? The sources mention a global cooperative forum. What's that about?
Yeah, that's important. While the bedrock is local community, the vision isn't just local. The sources state clearly there's also a need for the establishment of a true global cooperative forum. And crucially, it has to be based on the working presumption and enactment of prior unity. That underlying principle has to be the basis for global interaction too.
And what's the main job of this global forum?
It's about tackling the big shared challenges. In this forum, the idea is that everyone will, and indeed must, focus on the genuine necessary issues that everyone has in common. Things like climate change, pandemics, global poverty issues that transcend borders. And this connects to that really evocative phrase used in the material, wash all the flags. It suggests moving beyond narrow nationalism, beyond tribal loyalties, to actually work together as one humanity on the problems that affect us all.
Wash all the flags. That's powerful. So bringing this all together, what's the key takeaway for us, for listeners right now? Is there a sense of urgency here?
Oh, absolutely. A very strong sense of urgency runs through it all. Adi Das uses phrases like the hour of decision approaches. He suggests humanity is really at a make-or-break point, and that our future, our salvation, as he puts it, depends on enough people, a critical mass, waking up to and living from this prior unity. It's presented not as a casual suggestion, but as an urgent necessity for survival.
It really sounds like the core message is that the necessary change isn't just political or economic, but it's fundamentally about a shift in consciousness.
Exactly, that's the heart of it. And there's a note of optimism, too, interestingly. The text suggests the transformation of the human species has begun. It even uses this metaphor. A new epidemic is spreading among us. More and more people are infected by the recognition of our unity. Like this awareness itself can spread contagiously. It's ultimately a call to action, a call to move beyond our fragmentation towards a cooperative world, starting with that inner realization spreading outwards.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive, a really challenging perspective on our world's problems, and a truly radical proposed solution. We've gone from understanding this egoic, short-sighted rationality that denies our fundamental prior unity, which is seen as the root of our crises, to exploring this idea of reality politics, which isn't about fixing systems first, but about building intimate cooperative communities. And then seeing how that might scale up to a global cooperative forum. It's clear Aditya Samraj is really asking us to rethink, well, pretty much everything.
Absolutely. And you've heard how the emphasis keeps coming back to personal responsibility, hasn't it? It's about fostering that intimate cooperative community right where you are and embracing that ego-transcending discipline. And fundamentally challenging that idea that life is just about individual survival, proposing instead this right self-surrender as the path forward.
So for you, our listener, maybe here's a final thought to take away and consider. If, as Aditya suggests, the hour of decision approaches, and rediscovering prior unity on a mass scale is the actual key, what might one small, maybe difficult, ego-transcending act of self-surrender look like in your own daily life? Could that be where reality politics truly begins? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
You can buy both of Brad's two recent paperback books, In God's Company and the Universal Tradition of Global Wisdom, on Amazon.com.